But MTP, which is actually short for mercury proof, is actually our next upcoming release. Basically, I think we're quite close to releasing it, and it's basically a proof of work algorithm. And most people think like, oh man, just another proof of work algorithm, it just changes stuff like that. But MTP is quite unique. First of all, MTP was actually created by the same people who did Equihash. Equihash is the algorithm that's actually implemented in Zcash, and they felt that Equihash was not as good as they thought, as they wanted to be, and that's why they came out with MTP. So MTP is supposed to be like an improved version of Equihash, and I guess what MTP is trying to solve is the problem that we're seeing in Bitcoin today, which is miner centralization. Like, we see now Bitcoin, the whole idea was, Satoshi Nakamoto was saying like, one single computing unit, one vote. So of course you have more computers, you have more votes. So, everyone kind of has to say, like the more computers they have, the more you have to say. But now this is not the case with Bitcoin, because only a handful of manufacturers can build these specialized machines called ASICs machines. I think only 2 to 3 manufacturers in the world that's producing ASIC machines with any type of meaningful volume, and most of these are based in China. And right now you have, like Bitmain is controlling so much of the supply of these mining machines, and China is having all these miners right now. So that, like, for example, with the whole blockchain scaling debate, just a small group of people who own these mines or the manufacturer supply suddenly has a very disproportionate amount of say. The community, the users of Bitcoin might say, yes, we want this. But if the miners say no, that's a huge problem. And there's even been talk about, let's change Bitcoin's proof of work algorithm altogether, which is a ridiculous notion. But, it's come to a point where miners, like, a small group of people are having a very large amount of say on a currency that's supposed to be decentralized. And I think it actually goes against the spirit of what Bitcoin was supposed to be about. Now, of course, there's been, kind of attempts and many other types of attempts to sort of come up with ASIC resistant algorithms. And like, for example, I guess the first attempt was actually Litecoin, which came up with Script. And Script actually can be quite ASIC resistant, but the problem is that, yes, you can have a very hard memory proof of work, but you have to realize that each node also has to verify that transaction, that the sort of proof of work is valid. So if you make, like, Script was supposed to be, it's a memory hard proof of work, but they only use 128 kilobytes of memory, which is actually insignificant. And within a few years we have already seen Script ASICs. Dash also came up with a ASIC resistant algorithm called X11, whereby they just chain a bunch of algorithms together, which was also kind of pointless because none of them use memory, and they developed an ASIC for that. And the ASIC is several thousand times more efficient than a computer or even a GPU. So that now the only people who can, like, even with Dash, it's a real problem right now. There are only probably like 2 or 3 manufacturers of X11 ASICs, and many of them aren't selling them anymore. And I don't know why people are not so concerned about this, because you basically just have a few companies controlling the security of your network. So you can have, a multi-billion-dollar coin that's controlled with people we should only put in maybe, a few $1 million of investment. And that to me is scary. And MTP is actually a way to sort of give you, sort of give back the power to the people, whereby anyone with a computer can mine, anyone with a GPU can mine. you don't need very specialized hardware, or rather it's very hard to develop specialized hardware. And the whole idea of MTP is to make the proof of work algorithm very memory hard. Now, what is the sort of logic behind this? And actually, this is quite interesting because Zcoin actually started, I think about 2,000, 3,000 blocks in with a crazy proof of work algorithm. It was a Lyra 2 variant, and it was really like you could not you could really not develop an ASIC for it because the parameters were just like crazy. The only thing that could do it was CPU. And the problem with that was that the nodes were spending so much memory to verify that they were crashing. And because let's say if I have a very memory hard type of proof of work, every time when they want to verify it, the verifier also has to do a lot of work to verify. So suddenly, let's say like a mining pool, that's having all these miners and transactions, suddenly he was having to have 200 gigabytes of RAM to run his mining pool, which was ridiculous, and it's not economical in the long run. So MTP is saying that, okay, so why is MTP ASIC resistant? Because it's memory hard. Memory hard means that because with ASICs, you can always optimize computational tasks. That means I develop specialized chips to do functions in a more efficient way. Because CPUs are sort of general processing units. They're supposed to be doing all types of tasks. While if I develop a machine that's supposed to do one type of calculation only, I can gain efficiency benefits of it. But by involving memory in it, memory is already very efficient. And when I'm using memory, it's not just about the computational, but it's also about the speed in which you interact with the memory. And that's sort of it's sort of a cap in that, because you can't develop a special type of RAM. RAM is RAM, that there are improvements in RAM, but if you're going to develop an ASIC, you're most probably going to get regular RAM off the market, which is also going to perform the same as everyone else. So where you have an algorithm that's mostly about dealing with the memory and not so much on the computation, so whatever optimizations that you can get is only on the small part, which is the computational part, but you can't really optimize for the memory part. Well, that's a general idea to say that a memory hard proof of work is hard to optimize for because you're limited by memory latency and speed, and the speed that you interact with the memory. Now, the problem with developing a very memory hard proof of work last time was, as we mentioned, the verifier also had to have that amount of memory. So let's say if I had a memory hard proof of work that required 2 gigabytes of RAM, then the verifier might need 2 gigabytes of RAM as well, which is very hard, especially when it's dealing with a lot more transactions as such. But with MTP, you make the miner have to have that 2 gigabytes of RAM, but the verifier just needs a fraction of that to verify, and it's verified in milliseconds. So it becomes whereby I get to have all the benefits, like with Bitcoin is verified like that because they just do a SHA-256 hash, which happens almost instantly. But now I can have a very hard memory proof of work that's verified almost as quickly as a Bitcoin SHA-256 transaction. So what this means is that I have a very ASIC resistant algorithm that is performance-wise almost like Bitcoin. And I think that's a real a step in the right direction, rather than all this other type of that means that I can still run my node off a Raspberry Pi. I don't need a beefy system. And I think in the long term that may be important, because you don't want people to have very powerful computers just to run a Zcoin node. And it also prevents transaction spam, because it takes so much work to do it. And one of the ways, like let's say if I do a memory hard proof of work, and I wanted to sort of clog up the network, I just spam all these types of transactions in, and yes, I'll still have to do this, but because all the nodes are sort of choked up verifying the transactions, that also sort of brings the network to a standstill. But when the verifier is just going like this, you cannot spam it fast enough to lock up the nodes, which I think is also very important from a sort of network stability basis. I think it's quite hard to communicate how MTP is such a groundbreaking piece of work. But I mean, if you want to talk like as a layman, we're saying that we are giving you back the power to have a say and the mining in the network without allowing a few select individuals to have the say, while maintaining all the performance sort of benefits of Bitcoin. I guess that's it in a nutshell.